Hi guys, today I'm showing you how to paint these dreamy loose watercolor flowers. These are the tools I'm using. Firstly, I'm wetting the whole page. I'm loading a large amount of water for this wet on wet technique. The paper I'm using allows a sufficient amount of water to absorb, so the paper can fully stretch out. It's 100% cotton, cold pressed 300 GSM watercolor paper, and that's what I suggest you use for this painting. Even within these specifications, the exact absorbency of paper can vary slightly. Just make sure the paper is wet enough, but not so wet that the water sits or moves on the surface. If you do end up adding a little too much and have water just sitting on top without soaking in anymore, don't worry. You can get rid of the excess flowing water from the surface of the paper by using a brush or a napkin to soak it off. Now I'm loading some green colors. The paints I'm using here are from Daniel Smith. These are granulation green colors, but of course you could use any non-granulation paints for this. Choose one green that shifts toward warm and another cooler green for some variety. Dab the color here and there like this. We're not trying to cover the whole page, just add some green patches and try to keep the warm and cool greens separate so they don't blend and become muddy. If your paints aren't spreading out as much as mine are, you can add a little bit more water to your brush, which can help with this to some extent. At this moment, the whole paper is wet enough, so you can easily create smooth washes. Now I'm dabbing some Quinacridone Rose on some of the white spaces here and there. You can see the color here is not spreading much, it's somewhat noticeable boundaries. I didn't load too much water onto the brush to make sure it holds less water than the paper. This is a safer approach for beginners and helps prevent blotchy backgrounds when the previous white layer starts to dry. To counteract a lack of spreading, you can use a clean white brush to soften the edges, and the whiteness should be similar to the whiteness of the paper. When the paint spreads out a bit, the color in turn gets paler, so you can then strengthen the color a little by adding thicker paint without much water. I have added all of the colors I want for now. Now I'm adding some white ink without loading extra water. And dabbing it on the white gaps between these color blotches. We can see how much it spreads out. And then if we want, we can load some water to help it spread out even further. Do not add water in the first place when you load the ink, as the ink would quickly become too diluted. Now I'm adding some thick warm green to give the painting some more depth. The paper is drying out whilst we paint. I'm loading some of the rose paint with a thin brush and dab it like this to create loose flowers. The paint's nearly dry but not completely dry, so the edges are still soft. If the paper were fully dry, the edges would look harsh. Keep in mind to keep the water on your brush minimum at this stage. Now I'm just adding a little green around the flowers. The paper is even drier. I'm using a clean dry brush to lift some color for dreamy bubbles. If yours isn't lifting as easily as mine, your paper might be too dry. Or more likely, you're using a highly staining paint. In that case, you can try another medium like white acrylic or gouache. Now I'm painting another type of flower. You can paint any flowers you want, but don't make it overcomplicated. Keep it simple.